Hello Nigeria, hello Africa. You're watching Sports Business with Orufuo Ezaga, and the station, of course, is Plus TV Africa, and we're reaching you live from our studios in Victoria Island, Lagos. Today, we have a very special guest in the studio, and if you're in the sports broadcast space, sports broadcast, sports media, you don't want to miss the next 45 to 50 minutes, because there's a lot you're going to hear, a lot of insightful things you're going to hear that could change the way you look at sports, and probably even open up a business opportunity or two for you or your organization. Today, we're going to be talking about sports broadcast media. And in the studio with me is somebody who should know. Her experience in the contemporary lingo is pro max when it comes to sports broadcast media. I'm talking about Mrs. Chichi Nwoko. She is the founder of What Media Group, and she's the CEO of Team 33 Production. They do a lot of stuff, a lot of production work for sports properties in Nigeria, as well as, in other sectors like entertainment and whatnot. She's going to be talking about all of that on the program today. Now, as is the nature of this program, I've told you what you're up against, and we're going to be taking a very, very short break, just about a minute or so that gives you time to get some water, invite a friend or two to join you on this watching this program. And when we return, the business begins. You're welcome back to the program Sports Business with Orufuo Ezaga. You're watching Plus TV Africa. We're reaching you live from our studios in Victoria Island, Lagos. Right? So now I'm going to introduce our special guest in the studio today. She's the enigmatic entrepreneur behind What Media Group, and she's the CEO of Team 33 Production. Welcome to the studio, Chichi.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, actually, that you're here. Thanks for honoring the invitation.
You.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you do a lot of work for sports in Nigeria, right? But before we get down to all of that, let's meet the story behind the person that we're seeing right now. First and foremost, maybe we'll talk about what sports broadcast production is, and then we'll talk about the story of Chichi Nwoko.
Okay. So, sports production essentially runs the gamut from either live, right? So whether you're covering a football match, a boxing match, you can cover it live, you can cover it and play it back. But we know the essence of sports is having that live feel, right? It's like a reality show. You need to know the end, right? But there's a lot of things around sports that can be covered. There are documentaries, right?
Okay.
I think that there's a big gap in the market in terms of being able to, we have news programs, for instance, that have news highlights every day. But, I think that with news media, it's also then being able to identify young local talent, right? I remember as a young kid growing up in the States from high school, they were already looking at, okay, who had the potential to make it pro.
Yeah.
So by the time, let's say Kobe Bryant, right? You can go back to when Kobe was 16, because they were following that story since he graduated, from high school to college to professional, right? So sports is encompassing, right? And more than the live sports itself, I think the stories behind the sports, the business of the sports. And so as a continent, as a country, we're still yet to even scratch the surface of everything that it can be. But at the core, what I tell people is that sports essentially is entertainment, right? And in a world that is going to be disrupted by everything AI, sports might be that last thing, right?
Standing.
Because people, if you've ever been to a football match, a big stadium, 80,000 people, there's an energy, right, that is addictive, right? That no amount of technology, AI is going to fix that, right? So capitalizing on just even, there's a live production aspect of it that goes on television, but there's everything that happens in the stadium, that whole experience, right? That working in this space, once again, huge opportunities, right? So people can look at it and say, well, you know what? Our infrastructure is not where it needs to be. The stadiums aren't full. We don't have the concession stands and everything around them. One of the big opportunities is the fact that those are all areas for growth, areas for opportunity.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, that's basically the thing in media that I personally find a bit interesting. Like somebody said on this program, incidentally, that sports is only a business today when media gets in. That before media, it's all just social activity.
Yes.
But once media gets in, then the whole world is part of that experience, and your numbers just explode and all of that. But what is your story? How did you get into because why am I asking? First, you're a woman.
Okay.
And I mean that in a good way.
I couldn't tell. Okay, no, I'm kidding.
And I mean that in a good way. So yeah, you're a woman. This is a male-dominated field. But I read something that you said. Look, it doesn't faze you. You walk into that space. Sometimes you're a woman, sometimes you're African, and sometimes you're the only person in the room like that, but you don't care. So tell us your story. Where did you get all of that confidence, that mindset, and your interest in the broadcast media? Where did you get all that from?
So I think I would say it all starts at home. I'm one of 6 kids, one late, but 6 kids, all boys.
Wow.
Right? So I'm the only girl. I'm also a parent of 2 boys, right? And, I think my father was very intentional in terms of always pushing me to be better than my brothers. He never said, well, because they're a woman, do less. He was like, actually, because they're a woman, I expect more.
Okay.
Right? There was never, a girl, do this, right? Everybody did chores. Everybody did what everybody was supposed to do. So I never actually saw sex, right? Yes, I wanted a sister and everything else, but, being around men, I don't think to myself, they're all boys, because I'm very familiar in those settings, right? I mean, there are times that I would say, like over the summer, my brother's friends would come over and it would just be all men around the house, right? And so thankfully to them, they also treated me like, once again, a boy. So if they roughed themselves up, I was liable to be thrown across the living room as well. So, I think that foundation definitely helped, because I didn't grow up seeing who I was as something different, right? From a traditional standpoint also, because I was the only girl and the first girl, my parents always made it that, you're the ada, you're the glue that holds the family together. So if there's any issues, we're coming to you, right? Yeah. So if anything, I was always then the leader anyway, right? And so I'll talk about how that translates into
what you're doing,
what I do today. But I started my journey at about 16, 17, and initially I started in the entertainment space, working as an intern for the talent coordinator for the Apollo Theater in New York. And once again, I think that I'm grateful to her, because oftentimes, if you've been in this industry, right, there can be a situation, for instance, where you're not available, right, but you need to go live at 3. They might call the camera guy, sit down, let's go, right? And so that experience over 4 or 5 years gave me a lot of experience in terms of just saying, Chichi, we're going live on this day at this time. We need X amount of talent. Go and fill it. They didn't tell me how to do it. It was just results, right? And I knew I couldn't come back with excuses. So in terms of just being a problem solver, right? That was my first foray into the media space. I also had spent some time as an intern. So I tell a lot of young people, you don't go from 0 to 100, right? So it's very, very important. If this is something that you want to do, spend your time understudying people. It may not necessarily be a paycheck, but I think that the education and exposure is just incredible. And so my first main internship after working at the Apollo was at CBS in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And my tell me when you need to go on a break.
No problem. Yeah.
So I started off as a consumer affairs intern, meaning I was logging tapes. If they needed me to go and do pickups, I would go and do that. However, I did. So at this time, I was probably between 17, 18. Across the hall from me was the sports department, and the main reporter was a former NFL player.
Okay.
And so when I would have downtime, I would go and be like, so what do you guys do? And they're like, don't worry, you can come with us, right? And so that was my first major exposure into live sports. Obviously, they were covering it from a highlights angle because they were getting sound bites for the local news.
Okay.
So I would go with them. Sometimes I was pulling cables or whatever they needed, right? Maybe it's going and telling the next player, please, we need you for an interview, and getting them on standby. But I went to basketball games and soccer games and hockey games. And that was my first interest into sports. I'll fast forward. I spent about eight years working for the major networks in the US, and specifically about 7 years at the ABC affiliate television station as an account executive. So we sold everything, right? So whether it was Super Bowl match that was coming or a basketball game, to entertainment, right? But I think that for me, what was interesting were the numbers of viewers, right, watching sports, and the money that was being commanded, right, from just one Super Bowl event, right, that would be sold out weeks or months in advance, right? And all the activities and planning that went into that, right? Fast forward to 2010, I moved back to Nigeria. And my first job, and the person responsible for bringing me back, was a gentleman called Rotimi Pedro.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yes.
It's been here before.
Okay, so I initially came back to work on Idols, and that's what I did, right? Run his entertainment. He was launching the entertainment arm of his business called OMI. Okay. But I was sitting right next to sports again, right? So as you probably know, they had the World Cup rights at that time for free to air. They had EPL rights. They had all kinds of sports rights, right? And so it was kind of working with them, working and seeing how they commercialized it, but then even also creating activities and events around the sports franchise locally. So I did that, went back into entertainment, right, because that's my core. So I produced a few films and television shows until 2016, 17. Kwese Free TV, they had a sports arm, and I was called to run the TV channel. Now, given my experience in working in television and everything, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll help to kind of stand it up and what have you. But then when I got in there, right, Kwese had franchises like Matchroom Boxes, so we did a lot of activations around Anthony Joshua when he had his big matches back then, or big fights back then. We had Carabao Cup, we had, free to air for Premier League as well, and NFL. So the sports offering was enormous. At that point, I was also very instrumental in working to get airline sponsorships for the bobsled team. I don't know if you remember the bobsled team. Yes, team. Exactly. But you know what that opportunity exposed me to was the amount of people doing things in sports and the paucity of platforms. So they just had one platform to get it out, right? And so every day I would just be getting content owners and producers, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do, how to help you. But because most of our content was coming from South Africa, right? So I was still trying to fight for us to create openings within our schedule to support some of these local talents. As you know, back then, Kwese had also sponsored our local basketball team, even though, there were some issues around that. Yes, around the league. So during that time, one of the things I got involved with was the Access Bank Lagos City Marathon, right? So Mr. Buki Olakwade, who is incredible, he has been a supporter, and he came to our office and just said, "Hey, listen, we want to do end-to-end live of the marathon." Right. And before then, they'd always just done a little bit of the beginning and not really, the whole thing. And he said, "Can you guys do it?" And I said, "Absolutely, we can do it." And luckily, one of our directors that we work with, we usually fly in, has incredible experience with Olympics and marathons. So initially we had to bring, a lot of that international talent to help. But I'm proud to say that, we've been off and on covering the marathon between ourselves and Supersports. But as of this year, right, we did the whole thing with just local crew.
Wow.
Right. And so we've been doing things like the African Sports Festival, right? We've been doing the championship athletics. We're also going to be doing the Gateway Games, which is coming up very soon, with Anthony Joshua again as a host, not as a host, as an ambassador for the Gateway Games. So just even in terms of working with him and all the exciting things that he looks to do in the boxing space, we did the African Military Games in Abuja as well. And what you realize is that there is a lot happening, locally, and there's a gap.
Okay, so I'm going to take something that you said, because it's why this program is in existence. Yeah, and it is that at Team 33 production, we believe that opportunity abounds in Nigeria's sports sector. Therefore, we are passionate about showcasing and celebrating local sports and homegrown talent. Now, we were talking earlier, and we said, look, sports business is local. You have to win the local game before you go international. All right. So the NBA, for instance, is local to
absolutely.
the US. The EPL is local to the British people and all of that. And here we still have, look, we're a nation, 230 million people, people who, with a very young population. All right. We're probably the world's last major sports business opportunity.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
How are you guys? Is this what you see? And what do you think? How do you think 33 production can advance? This new call for sports as business, as opposed to sports as just social activity.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking earlier, there's something about getting sports on television. There's something about getting live coverage done. This is our third year of working with the MPFL. And I can say that year in, year out, you can feel it getting better, right? You can feel things getting smoother. The collaboration with both the league chairman and the NFL officials, they understand it now. They understand the importance of it. I think that, there's certain things that have obviously gone into place in terms of the management, but just people knowing that there are cameras around, that if you wanted to do anything dodgy, that there are all kinds of lenses that would look at you, right? So you have referees that don't want to be seen in a certain light. Players want to do their best. Coaches want to do their best. So it does change the game. There is this amazing documentary on Netflix, on Amazon Prime, called Fever Pitch. And it's quite interesting because it details the history of the Premier League starting almost 30 years ago. And it's not very far from what's happening here, right? It was Rupert Murdoch coming in, obviously back then putting, I think it was $30 million, right? That really changed the game and changed the narrative. Sometimes, I think we're also very hard on ourselves. Right? There are instances where we have done live coverages where I know there was one match that we covered in Enugu. I think the capacity is about 25,000 and there were like 30,000 people there, right? The narrative sometimes is, our leagues, they're not serious. Nobody comes to the stadiums. But a lot is changing, right? So even with the Premier League, they used to call them all these horrible things. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the footage of the league about 30 years ago. There was fighting, the stadiums were horrible, everything was bad, right? So
there's nothing that, is unique to Nigeria. I think that if it's properly funded, right, if the right private capital comes in, then it changes things, right? Media is a big deal. It took a Rupert Murdoch that owns Fox and Sky to come in, make that investment, put it on television, market it, change the narrative to get the league to where it is today, right? So it's just ourselves being intentional about that. Now, what we have to figure out is how we create a space in the sports sector for private equity to come in, or private companies to come in.
You think that's the future?
It has to be.
Okay.
It has to be, right? Government is great, right? And I think their support in the space has been as a social impact, right? How do we get people off the streets, right? How do we keep young people engaged with sports? But sports is business, right? And so when you're looking at sports as an impact initiative and a business initiative, they're at odds, right? So if you have people coming in and investing real money, then for them, it's not just making sure that, okay, the kids went out and they played. It's no, they won. Are we selling these players? How are we marketing these players? How are they eating? Exactly. And I can't even carry this conversation further without giving massive credit to our principal, who's our huge investor in Team 33, Mr. Kunle Shoname, and the Cooker Holding Family Office. He, as a private individual, has invested heavily in sports. Doesn't really speak about it because for him, it started off once again as a social initiative. Let's get kids off the street. Let's get them engaged, right? He built a massive property that's kind of like an academy that has about 5-6 pitches. I know that they're building
in
Ikene, exactly. I don't know if you've been there. And so not only do they have a team that's part of the MPFL, Remo Stars, they also have a young team, right?
They're going to be champions.
Yes.
I'm hoping they're champions.
Yes, beyond limits. They do trainings with all age groups, right? And these are people that he's paying for their school, they're feeding, they travel all across the world playing, and winning, right? So it's not just then the sports, it's also their health, their mental well-being, and making sure that they're educated, right? He's understood it, right? I mean, I think that last year they sold one of their players to Inter Milan, and I think the club was waiting 2 years for the kid to turn 18. As the kid turned 18, they landed in Ikene to come and carry him. I want to say that they've probably sold about 14, 15 players.
These are things that would like to would really like to have figures to these things so that people better understand the value of sports business.
Absolutely.
Like, for instance, there's a story going around that says that in 2024, I think 2024, he sold players to the tune of about 3.8 million euros. That's the story. And nobody has denied it. Do you get?
So I'm not here to confirm or deny, but I can tell you that players are being sold. Right. Not only are they being sold, there are some that are, I know there are 2 that got admitted into a university in Ohio, just because of their skills, right? And once again, they have a system, and once again, Chairman doesn't really like to talk too much. He's more in terms of the work, right? He's passionate about it. If you talk to him, he'll tell you he has retired. He's there in the morning watching the kids play. He's there in the evening watching the kids play. It is something that it's a passion project, right? But what people will see is, okay, to the tune of 3.2, that's how much he sold. But he started this journey about 14 years ago, right? So sports investment is a long game, right? I'm sure during that course of time, they've made many mistakes. It's not everybody that they sell, right? And so it is a passion project that turned into, oh, wow, okay, we can actually make money off of this, right? He's now expanding into seeing what's available even in the boxing space. He's just signed
into projects like yours. How did you get there's 33 production off the ground? Because this is getting investors into a sports business idea, and it's not very easy in Nigeria. This is not something you founded with your money. What by that I mean, you're not the one who put up, like, say, 60-70% of the funds. How did you manage to get investors interested in a broadcast production company in an environment that is highly risky?
I think that, you asked about first my story, right? You have to crawl before you walk.
Okay.
And even when you look around, I think, especially in these spaces, it's very easy to say, well, we don't have this and we don't have that, we don't have this. When I did the marathon and most of the sports events, I didn't have anything.
Okay.
Right? I thank the DG of NTA that was very charitable. Not charitable, but we had to pay, right? But the fact that they allowed us use their trucks, that was a start, right? And sometimes people just have to see the traction, the quality, right? The fact that even with those resources, we'd covered FIFA matches as well and CAF matches, it was an easier conversation, because what happened, it was actually then people that I had done work for that now connected me, right? To now say, okay, how do we, with the Kuka family office looking to see how they could do more and invest more in the space. And the beautiful thing about Mr. Kunle Shoname and his family office is that they understand the power of media, right? I mean, we're talking about the owners of Bet Niger, which I consider the #1 media platform in Nigeria, right? I mean, they're either between #1 or 3 in terms of most visited sites, right? So I think when you are in that space and you're seeing that people are actually just betting on sports, right? It's a no-brainer, right? And they're betting because they're seeing it, right? They're watching the matches or what have you. So having somebody that was already passionate and understands the power of media and the power of broadcast. And like you said, the trajectory of sports only changes when you have the productions and when you have the live productions, right? And then we also have a second investor, Chapel Hill Denham as well, who understand the power and the need for distribution, right? So has it been an easy journey? Absolutely not, right? But I think that in everything, no matter how difficult a situation is, people are always looking for value, right? And if you're able to show what you can do with a little, then it's easy to say, what, if I had this and this and this and this in place, what more can we do? So we're still on the journey, thankful to the entire team, over the years that I'd worked with, that make it possible every day, right? To go out and cover 4 live matches. I don't think that MPFL has ever been at that point where on one weekend we'll be covering matches in the north, we'll cover matches in the south. So we push ourselves to try to get.
Isn't that a logistical nightmare?
Like you said, after you do something a few times, you're like, okay, you just kind of get used to it, right? And what we realized is that training was very, very important, right? So if you don't have sports coverage every weekend or every week, then you realize that you don't have the operators, right? I mean, there are some times when, you would be asking for a director and they will tell you we have 3 proper live sports director in this entire country, right? Proper replay, right? Maybe 4 people, right? So we then launched T33 Academy to start training people, right? And one of the things that we try to do is reach out to different schools, right? When we go to different states, we would try to get young people there. But, we live in a very different time as well, right? But as much as possible, when we can find young people that are interested and passionate about getting into the industry, we create opportunities for them.
It's been a brilliant half hour. And it's a good thing that you talked about the opportunities that are open to young people. Just recently, I was discussing, just today actually, a young guy who says he wants to Japa, and I'm saying to him, have you explored the opportunities in this country? There's still so many opportunities. People have not even started to think in those directions. So maybe you should explore more options and all of that. And thanks to companies like yours and what you're doing, more young people can have opportunities and more options. Now we're going to go on a short break, and we hope you've had an excellent time. 30 more minutes coming your way, and it's going to be even more insightful stuff, because now we're going to be looking at the numbers, and we're going to be looking at how, if you play in the sports industry, you yourself could become, a really big fish tomorrow. Don't go away. When we return, the business continues. You're welcome back to the program Sports Business with Orufuo Ezaga. You're watching it on Plus TV Africa, and in the studio with me is the Mrs. Chichi Nwoko, who is the founder of What Media Group and CEO of Team 33 Production. Now, if you see that I'm flustered, right, it's because you probably caught something that you shouldn't have at the end of the first segment. We apologize for all of that. Chichi.
It happens. It's live television. So yes, we are allowed.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about the numbers, right? Nigeria is a huge country. Yeah, we have about 230 million people. That's a huge audience, right? And then, I talked to you about, how beyond our local audience, if we do something in Nigeria that works, the way music and movies have shown, Africa would want it. So that scales up your audience, right? And then there is the fact that we have proven that we can produce world-class talent in this country. And then there's the economy that we have that's sizable. And then finally, the global integration of Nigerians, all right? So this is stuff that you can turn to, some crazy money. If there's 230 million, if we target, say, even 200, even 100 million people around the world, and you get $1 for each one of those people for a 1-year period, that's some serious money. How do we make that possible? I suspect that what you're doing now is fundamental to that. So,
yes, I think looking at our population is one way, right? But I think that there are many ways to skin a cat.
Okay.
And sometimes just looking at our population can be a little bit deceptive. Netflix looked at our population and Amazon looked at our population. And when they came, they were like, the math is not mathing, right? So how we treat our how we treat our entry to the market in terms of sports has to be very different, and it's very possible. I think the first thing that we need to do is build a viable product.
Okay.
Right? And the truth of the matter is that our audience goes beyond Nigeria, beyond Africa. We need to look at our sports as a global export, right? The same way that we're consuming Premier League and NBA and all these, La Liga and everything else, right? So what they're looking, if they just looked at just their market, they would struggle, right? Even a FIFA, like you build a product that has a global audience and you're selling off of those numbers, right? So it's less than just your $1 from every person living in Nigeria. But given my experience, I would dial it back and ask key players, right, which are HNIs, right, and even the government to a certain degree, to really look at how we can create a product that one can export. And it starts from our stadiums, right? I often tell people, listen, we can use 12K cameras, right? If the stadium is the stadium, we'll just make it, we'll give you high quality patchy grass. We can't change those things, right? So just general infrastructure, general maintenance, just looking at, the fact that we only have one FIFA approved stadium in this whole country, which is the stadium in Uyo, says a lot about how seriously we're taking the sector, right? So we just need to look at first the general infrastructure, because I think that fixing that takes us 50-60% of where we need to be, right? So that means that your pitches are on par. That means that you have the proper lighting facilities so that we can have more matches covered, right? So whether you have lights, but proper working lights, proper power, right? To bring production costs down, do the stadiums have fiber, right? Which is where a lot of the international stadiums are going to, right? So you're collapsing your cost of satellite and everything else, and then you're able to then even do more broadcasts from one place, right? So not only are you doing the National League, but you're doing the lower leagues as well, right? And you're thinking about the entire value chain, right? And giving them, you know, the limelight required, right? So I think that's the first thing, is making that investment. And you can't go to, okay, how can we make billions if you haven't fixed these things, right? I think one thing that had to change, even, you know, just using the EPL that it was called then as a case study, was the experience, right? You know, then when it's safe, right? When you've created an environment and an ecosystem that families can come to, people can go and relax, right? Now they're saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to take 10% of my income and just, this is my time, right? But I think that for this market where FX and, you know, our currency is struggling, right? One of the key things that is being overlooked, right, is that once you have the correct infrastructure, you have the correct broadcast, right? You have the correct marketing and stories around the league, because that's also very critical, right? A big economy that is probably even bigger than, so the two things that really drive the sports business, right, are one, selling the players, right? And those are things that we can do even now, right? So first you have to be paying the players competitively, so you have the best people staying, so you have the best teams, like, so you're also giving good football, right? Imagine if we were at a space where, as I was saying earlier, Osimhen was playing, and I could go locally. I don't have to go and watch him.
Or the next Osimhen.
Or the next Osimhen, right? How do we use media and publicity to find that? You know, Lookman is playing. But in Europe, right, they can go to their stadium today and find their best players, right? So if they've had a chance to go and, you know, see Messi or Ronaldo, or there's one player that my kids are crazy about, or a few, right? And then even from that, you see the gaming aspect of it. And so there are many other verticals, all the merchandising. You know, if you go to a stadium and let's say Messi is playing, I'm just using an example, right? 40,000 people have gone and bought a jersey that's about $80,000, right? And that's just the ones that are there, not the ones that didn't make it, that just want to be in the bar watching, right? So the economy is a lot more than what we're even seeing. And I think that our local leagues have that power, right? They've done it before, right? So the likes of Daniel Amokachi, right, and so many of his era came from our local leagues, right? But somehow along the way, we kind of lost it, right? So right now what we're saying, we're not saying that this has never been done. We're saying we need to get back to first where it was and make it better.
Okay, there's a question I'd like to ask here. You talked about infrastructure.
Yes.
And the question I always ask people is, let's take football, for instance, the MPFL.
Yeah.
If somebody comes to you and says to you, let's invest in infrastructure for our matches. Yeah. What are you going to be looking at? Are you going to be looking at potential, or you're going to be looking at what's on ground? I.e., see, you guys can't even fill the 5,000 stadiums you have, capacity stadiums, and you want me to build 10,000, 20,000 and make it really, what's the guarantee that if we build these stadiums, the product itself becomes addressed? Isn't it that we should build the products, and then the investor says, okay, this Rickety Stadium still having full capacity, then let's build.
I'll throw the question back at you. How do you build the product?
Sorry?
How do you build the product?
First, tell the stories. You talked about storytelling, yeah? And there's actually, I dubbed one of your stuff. If my producer can give me the thing that you said about storytelling. Okay. You see, make these stories, tell your African stories, but make them, globally compelling.
Absolutely.
The thing is, when people watch football, this is just a personal opinion. When people watch sports, is it the sport that they watch or the stars that they follow? Do you understand? So, for instance, you talked about Messi. If he's playing, 40,000 shirts go off the shelves, right? But if you take out Messi from that equation, the 40,000 shirts stay where they are. All right? And I think the big problem we have in Nigeria is that's it. How do we tell this story in a way that is both authentically African and universally compelling? That's what you said. Yeah. So how do we tell our stories? Yeah, in such a way that, I think that the ordinary Nigerian fan knows that he's not going to walk into Onikon Stadium and see Emirates London quality. Yeah, but if he understands the players like you have said, if we see the next Osimhen is going to play, and we're all saying this guy is going to be the next big thing, this guy is going to be the next Rashidi Yekini and all of that. People follow these guys and then you follow them to these facilities, right? And I think that's where the real problem on Nigerian sports is. We have champions in Nigeria,
but we're not amplifying their stories.
But we don't have stars.
Yeah.
The fact that you're a champion doesn't make you a star. Yeah. So between being a champion and being a star, we've got to now give you the trappings of stardom. Exactly. Do you understand?
Exactly.
And there,
exactly.
There is where you have a really huge challenge. But I understand what you're saying, and infrastructure is very important. But like I said, I'd say to people, maybe we should tell the stories first, and that's what you're doing.
So I think that. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? And I'm not saying that we should go out and build a bunch of stadiums, right? I think, first of all, is the ones that we have, right? At the very least, for the respect of the game and the fans, just make those something that are presentable, right? Yeah. Because it's still, as I'm telling your story, it still clips from you playing enough stadiums that I'm using to say, can you see how he scores? Can you see how he tackled? Can you see XYZ? Right? And sometimes you can't downplay visual, right? Forgive me for going back to the music industry. A big movement for them was their music videos, right? So the artists were artists, but they started investing in their music videos, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, this stuff is nice, right? And then I'm listening to you because it's visually appealing, right? So you go to restaurants, they take the time to make the plate look a certain way, because first, if I can capture it with your eyes first, then I can get you to sit past, right? Especially since we have a reality, right? If this conversation was happening at a time when maybe Premier League wasn't available, people weren't looking at that standard, but their eyes are trained to see football a specific way, right? So for them to look at, and what we want to do is we want to build a product that is on par with global, right? And we're not saying that will happen today, but we're taking the steps, right? So yes, infrastructure so that we don't look like, okay, this footballer is just kind of there, right? So that as we're telling the story, it is visually appealing, right? I think that when people see that investment, right, the stadiums look better, right, the picture looks better, then a brand wants to associate with it, right? They want to, because telling those stories are not cheap, right? So you're saying, if you're a media company, that you need to go to Kano, you need to go to Abia, you need to go to Enugu, you need to follow people, right? So it's just not it's not a one-off where you just, okay, tell me about yourself. It's going in depth, right? And getting sound bites from their younger coaches, people that grew up with them, so that, you're not also going one time and then you're leaving, right? You're following them consistently so that people maybe saw somebody, like I said earlier, from high school, right? And they've now seen them enter into the league, and then they've now seen them, potentially about to sign, in Europe somewhere. Right. I think that that's very, very key. The other thing in terms of those stories, I think when we look at the audiences that will be consuming this product, they're young people, right? Young people, right? Especially as it relates to Nigerians. And, what I say is, just looking at the other sectors, when you can be a star in Nigeria, right? You can be a star anywhere because we have the numbers. So we may not have the numbers to pay you, but we have the numbers to make the world realize, look at this person, right? Because we can make you trend so that everybody turns around to say, please, what did Chichi do this morning, right? And that's what we can monetize, right? And so those young people need to see aspirational players, right? So when we're looking at their stories, we also need to look at how much are we paying them, right? Because the viewers also want to be able to see, I mean, listen, it's entertainment, it's showbiz, right? Like you said, where do they live? Where are they driving? Why should I be interested, right? It's why I want to see Ashake and Berna, right? And all the stars, right? So how do you ensure that these guys also have a life that's aspirational, right? So that you enjoy their story, but you enjoy a story that shows progress. You show a story that football has actually rewarded them and their hard work has rewarded them. And I think there's still that gap, today. But yes, we have a lot to do. It starts with story. The fact of the matter is that as we are right now, and as I started, yes, we can identify so many problems, but to your point, how do we still work with what we have, even though it's not perfect? And so I completely agree with you.
Okay. So that makes me feel smart. Anyways, so the thing is, let's talk about your experiences.
Okay.
With the MPFL.
Okay.
And even the marathon.
Okay.
Do you understand? But do you have two completely different experiences, for instance? And so yes, that. And then again, something that I got. I dug up on you.
Oh wow! Okay.
You said, working overseas.
Yeah.
You work their structure. In Africa, you learn to be
agile.
Yeah, to be agile, to be resilient, and all of that. Is that a bit like what you're seeing with the MPFL, with the marathon, stuff like that? What's the?
I think when you make those comparisons, and when I make those comparisons, right, you're also looking at more mature markets, right, that have been doing this for a very long time, markets that are so much better funded, right, and they've gone through their teething pain, right. There are some instances where I have to quote a book. One of the people that I look up to completely is Bob Iger, who's the former CEO chairman of Disney. And he has this incredible book, if you can read it, called Ride of a Lifetime, where he talks about his story. Okay. And he talks about one time, I think it's in the early 80s or late 90s, or late 80s, sorry, early 90s, where they were covering the Olympics, right? And basically, an incident happened where the schedule they had all went up in smoke, right? Yeah. So they had hours of Olympics to fill, and they were just like, we don't know. There's nothing, right? This has been canceled, this has been canceled, this has been canceled. And they just kind of had to start. And for me, it was just like, okay, right? This is normal for live television, for live sports, right? You just have to be ready. Anything can happen, right? And even when we bring in the international directors, what have you, anything that's live sports, right? You're giving it a chance, right? So we could be sitting on here right now and maybe something happens with the lights, everything goes black, right? So there's always a chance that anything can happen. I think what makes us different, right, and what makes the West, maybe a little bit more sophisticated in those areas, is that they have the funding. They have the funding for redundancies, So I remember when we were covering one of our Super Eagles matches, the FIFA guys were like, "You should have like 2 OB vans on standby." We're like, we can give you one, right? But for them, it was like, of course we'll have 3. Of course we'll have X, Y, Z, right? Because budget is not an issue, right? Okay. So I think that it's not because we don't have the capabilities. I think that we're just in a different time, right? Yeah. Facing different circumstances. Will we be in this same place in the next 10, 15 years? I don't believe so.
Okay, so that's That's the program.
That's it?
Yeah.
I was just getting into it. Oh my goodness.
This happens to me every week, right? Chichi, has been brilliant having you on this
so
program.
much.
And the key question, can you just quickly, very quickly talk about, opportunities for young women watching this program now, how they can get into the sports industry, and even young men and thrive? Just quickly, what opportunities there are for them?
Listen, opportunities abound. You just have to make yourself available, right? And know that in the beginning, depending on where you are in your journey, right, that you might have to just present yourself as, I would like to learn, right? But looking at television or sports or the media industry, I think everything that pertains to any other industry is available, right? So accountants, lawyers. So there's so much work behind the camera, right? There's so much work, whether you're producing, whether you're doing sports commentary, graphics, there's a whole world available, right? So now we've spent 1 hour just talking about football, right? But, I want to plug the Gateway Games in Ogun State, starting in May. There are 33 different events, right? So from gymnastics to golf, to you name it, right? Polo. So there's so many things that are happening, right? And so we're talking about football on television, but there are all these different sports that you can look at companies like ours, whether it's Team 33 Production or the Academy. And listen, there's so many people using YouTube as a tool to learn, or just watching, right? Watching sports. There's different media houses, broadcast houses that you can kind of reach out to as well.
Okay.
So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's been brilliant having you on the program. And that's been the program today. If you're watching the program and you're looking for an opportunity, she has said, look, they're looking for skilled hands in Nigeria. We're still really in the embryonic stage of developing the sports industry, business industry. And, you can always reach out. The Academy, you send your CV, you could be lucky. You could work somewhere else. You could also, train yourself. There are many ways you can do that because of technology today. All right. So that's been our program. We're going to come back to you again next week with another exciting package. Make sure you make it a date. All right. Until we meet again next week. This is me, Orufuo Ezaga, saying, be productive, be good, and stay safe.